Welcome back to Counseling Tips for Pastors and Ministry Leaders. This podcast exists to equip you as a leader, a pastor, a Bible study leader, a youth group helper, someone caring for other people who are hurting, who are struggling, to equip you with the counseling-related skills that are helpful in your ministry, and to encourage you in the hard work that you are doing for the Lord. My name is Jess Hayes, and I'm the director at a small nonprofit Christian counseling center in South Carolina called iHope Christian Care and Counseling. And I'm a licensed counselor in South Carolina, and I am passionate about not only caring for the clients who come into our office, but building up the churches in our community, and thanks to digital media throughout the world, building up churches so that we can all better care for each other. So if you are in the South Carolina area and you're interested in our services, or maybe making a donation, because we are a 501c3 and donations help us keep our client fees low and affordable, you can head to ihopeflorence.com and learn more about our ministry. But our conversation today is going to focus on caring for people through the classic stages of grief. And most pastors are going to encounter this in their ministries. Obviously, leading a funeral, sitting down with a widow or a widower, someone who has lost a loved one, that's kind of a classic part of pastoral leadership. Shepherding people through loss and through grief. But the reality is we live in a world that does not know how to handle grief and loss and mourning very well. And so all Christians in any sort of leadership position or ministry role, we all have a role to play in caring for and helping people who are grieving. So I want to kick us off with just a basic review of what are the classic 5 stages of grief. And of course, you can find plenty of theories out there that have additional stages of grief and things like this. It's not science, like it's written down somewhere other than in the books that have been written about it. But I think that these 5 stages will make sense to you. And the first stage is denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. So if we talk through those 5 stages just a little bit, denial, I think we can all agree that totally makes sense. When something horrible happens, you lose a loved one, you get fired from your job, your house burns down in a house fire, like when something crazy, out of the ordinary, unexpected happens, or even if it is expected, like maybe a cancer diagnosis and they do pass away, but it's over a period of time, some of that grief has therefore already happened during the hospice season for that type of illness. But at the very beginning, it makes sense that there is going to be a sense of denial. Now, how can we help people through that stage? Often, it's just waiting it out with them. We're not trying to force the issue. We can't go along with a full-out denial that something has happened, but we don't have to try to force conversations or try to convince someone to say or do something that shows us they're getting it. We can sit with them in the pain. Denial at that very first shocking change in a life circumstance makes sense. And then anger, I think we all know that is also very normal. When we have lost something or someone very important to us, we get angry. We should get angry. Death is not happy, good news. It is painful. It is sad. And it makes us angry. Bargaining as that third stage, I'm probably going to say this for all of them. It makes sense. I think we all will have those moments. Sometimes we're bargaining with God. If I do this, will you please just heal this person? If I do this, will you please just, give me a new job that's in my field, or, provide for my family, take care of us in some way. And sometimes the bargaining is with other people. that we're trying to negotiate something. We're trying to lessen the loss, lessen the grief by bargaining our way into a different situation. Depression is that classic fourth stage of grief where, again, we cannot rush the process. Sadness makes sense. If we even look at the scriptures, one of the most famous verses for kids to memorize because it's short is Jesus wept. When Lazarus dies, he knows this is for God's glory. He's going to bring him back from the dead. He knows all of this, and he still weeps with Mary and Martha who are grieving. He weeps with us. Depression, sadness, these emotions absolutely make sense. As a counselor, and I would hope as a pastor, we should be far more concerned about someone who does not experience sadness or some level of that almost overwhelming heaviness of emotion if you have lost a loved one. And again, it's not just death. It could be a job loss or, my example earlier, your house has burned down. If there's no sadness and there's no emotional connection to that, that would raise different flags in my brain as a counselor. And then that fifth stage is acceptance. Eventually, we come to a place where there's a new normal. It doesn't mean that the pain is gone. It doesn't mean there's no more sadness, no more anger, but it does mean that we're starting to move forward. And again, there are some newer stages of grief that are suggested, including an initial stage of shock, which makes sense. You have the shock and then you're kind of in denial about it. And some people think there's also a very normal stage that's often called testing between like depression and acceptance. Before I really accept this, there's some testing the waters of this new normal. At the end of the day, the labels that we might put on these stages, that's not what it's about. It's about coming alongside people and realizing that these very difficult, big emotions, these reactions to grief are very normal. And I think it's really helpful to not think of these as a linear progression, but to think in terms of circles. A circle as far as what are you expecting or what can the person expect when they are grieving, but also a circle as far as how can you engage with the person who is grieving. So it's not a linear process like, well, once I've been in denial, well, now I'm going to feel angry. Once I'm done with that and I start bargaining, I'll never feel angry again. It is not that type of a process. It is very normal that there will be new situations, new reminders, new triggers. There will be hard emotions, and they'll be different 6 months from now than they are today. The anger will probably look different 6 months from now than it does today. But these stages help us, number one, to normalize this experience. It doesn't feel good. It's not comfortable, but it is normal. It does make sense. And I think also that these stages of grief, knowing some of these labels, knowing what to expect, can give us some hope that when we feel totally overwhelmed by denial or by the anger or by that sense of depression, we can have hope that this feeling is totally overwhelming, but it will not last forever. And we can offer that hope to people who are grieving because your logic brain is probably not at its strongest when the emotion is overwhelming you. So we can think of this in terms of a circle. You're going to come back around to some of these same experiences, but they'll be a little bit different, hopefully a little bit less intense as time goes on. And then we can also think of a circle as far as our engagement with caring for someone as they are grieving. We need to move slowly. We're not trying to rush them through the process. We cannot expect much from them. But we also cannot think of it as a short-term thing. And when you're really busy with ministry, it can sometimes feel that way. I sat down with the widow. We had the funeral. It went great. All these people came. We had these very meaningful conversations and prayers, and we cried. And now I'm moving on because I've got work to do, and I've got my own family, and I've got my own stressors. And that widow is moving on, but in a very different and painful way. And our call as Christians, but especially in leadership, in a ministry capacity, we need to circle back. We need to keep checking in. We cannot assume because, they didn't happen to mention to me that they are still sad. We can't assume they're not sad because these stages make sense. So caring for people, it helps us to know what to expect, and we can normalize it for them. We need to move at their pace. There's no right or wrong way to grieve. A lot of that is culturally determined, what's considered normal or appropriate. There certainly can be complicated grief, is often what it's called in the counseling world, where complicated bereavement, you're not reaching that stage of acceptance. You're not finding a new normal and moving on. And we can all think back to the book of Job, right? That his friends absolutely did the right thing at the beginning. They heard what happened and they came to him. They sat with him. They cried with him. But then they opened their mouths. There were several friends. And we, of course, do not want to speak in the same way that they were speaking. We do not want to cast doubt on God's goodness and his faithfulness. We absolutely do not want to be blaming or negative about the thing that's been lost. There might have been some bad decisions made that impacted what happened. The grief season is not the time to focus on that, unless there's maybe an immediate safety concern that still needs to get dealt with. Caring for people through the stages of grief, it takes time. It takes the leading of the Holy Spirit, and it is uncomfortable. So I hope that through this little conversation here, I guess I do hope a little bit to make the process a little more comfortable, because if we know what to expect, that can help us manage it better. But mostly I want to highlight that the process itself is not comfortable, but it does make sense, and it is ultimately helpful. But if you feel uncomfortable, if you are uncomfortable with people crying in front of you, if you are uncomfortable with offering hugs when people need that, if you're uncomfortable with that first stage of denial, and that is just pushing your buttons and you're frustrated by that or struggling with that, that is not going to help the other person who is grieving. So knowing what to expect and being able to wrestle through that yourself, hopefully ahead of time, is going to help you come alongside people when they need you the most. So I hope that some of this is helpful for you. And if you're new here to the podcast, Counseling Tips for Pastors with Ministry Leaders, again, you can get more information about the iHope ministry at ihopeflorence.com. We offer professional counseling, life coaching. We keep our fees at 50% below the local average, thanks to donations. And you are invited to make a donation to support this cause. But also, just as far as the podcast itself, I would love for you to leave a review on your podcast app. That helps us grow, that helps us connect with more people. And I would remind you that we have it in audio format on those podcast apps. We have it on video at YouTube, our YouTube channel for iHope. I think our handle is iHope Florence through YouTube. And then we also have it on the blog at ihopeflorence.com. And you can copy the link at any time, send it to a friend, send it to your pastor, send it to a colleague. We are hoping that the Lord uses this to encourage and equip as many ministry leaders around the world as we can, because we are all in this for God's glory and for the good of the kingdom. So with all of that, my friends, we'll be back next week. So join us then for another episode of Counseling Tips for Pastors and Ministry Leaders.